Certainly to be scared has been part of human nature since its very beginnings.
What Alien says about us now are those fears that we have, which may be those fears that show up when we're dreaming, the nightmares.
I think he took a lot of techniques from Alfred Hitchcock in the sense that you don't really see everything. The imagination is used, and I think that's what made it so terrifying.
I think once you're making a movie, you better keep that pressure on all the way through. On anything, actually. But God knows on a thriller, or God knows it's a marathon of tension.
I've gone to films my whole life since I was a kid. I mean, I loved movies, and intuitively I knew that it was the thing I wanted to do more than anything. But the raising I had, my background, didn't suggest that that was a practical thing to do for a living.
I was a theater arts major in college. I wasn't a film major at UCLA, and I did love theater, but I realized after a while, after producing a couple of plays, that I had to stay in New York because that's where the investors are. And I hated the weather so much that the closest thing to theater was film. And I grew up in LA, so I decided, the hell with that, I'm not going to live in that freezing cold. I'll go into film.
I applied to USC, NYU, UCLA. NYU, UCLA blew me off, USC accepted. So I came out there and I was a student in the USC Department of Cinema. Met up with John Carpenter. John Carpenter started to do this master's thesis film, a science fiction movie. I got involved in it, and it grew out of hand. It finally got too big for a student movie, and so in the end, we ended up finding a way to put it into theaters. And instead of the most impressive student film ever made, we had the least impressive professional film ever made. A lot of things bothered me about Dark Star. We had an alien in it, which was a beach ball. It was our second try on that alien. I went away from Dark Star really wanting to do an alien that looked real. A couple of years down the line, I decided to do Dark Star as a horror movie instead of a comedy. And that was the germ of Alien.
We got to talking, I realized that Dan was a cinema student at USC, and it was in the process of making a kind of a spoof on 2001, a small film called Dark Star. And he was surprised to find that that was my secret love, was film, and particularly fantastic cinema always attracted me. So basically I helped out on Dark Star.
I had heard about Dark Star, and somebody was telling me about these two brilliant young guys, and sci-fi was my love, really. I also like suspense. But I went to see Dark Star, and I spoke to Carpenter on the phone, and I spoke to Dan on the phone. But it seemed to me I just had a more rapport with Dan just from the phone conversations. And I told him I had the rights to what became Total Recall, which was the original story by Phil Dick, was called We Can Remember It For You Wholesale. So he knew the story. He said, I love that. Yeah, he said, you got the rights to that? I said, yeah. He said, okay, and I got something I got to discuss with you that I have been working on about a year, and I need to make a breakthrough. And maybe you're the guy that can make me have it happen. And that turned out to be Alien.
I had this opening. I didn't know where it was going to go. I knew I wanted to do a scary movie on a spaceship with a small number of astronauts. Like I say, Dark Star is a horror movie instead of a comedy. And I had this creepy opening in which astronauts awaken to find that their voyage home has been interrupted. They're receiving a signal from this mysterious planetoid in an alien language. They go down to investigate. They get stalled down there. Their ship breaks down.
I've got 29 pages written, but I don't know you. I can't trust you to leave the house with this. The story, I, of course, know, and you have nothing written in the story. I said, no, I've just got the rights to the story. I hadn't yet tried to write it yet. And he said, okay, will you sit here and just read this? And this is what I got. I'm stuck on it, frankly, but read this. So I sat there and I read it, and it was very close to what we actually ended up with on the screen, those first 29 pages.
The threat at the center of the story, whatever this monster or thing or danger was going to be. It was not at all clear to me at this point.
The first act is fantastic. I said, oh, you know, possibly, maybe I can help you with it. And he said, okay, I can help you in Total Recall. So we decided, however, that we would tackle Alien first because Total Recall would be way more expensive because at that time we envisioned Alien could be a Roger Corman movie just in one location, you know, several different rooms in an old warehouse.
A Chilean filmmaker named Alejandro Jodorowsky telephoned me from Paris. Was it Paris, France? Or Paris, Texas? No, Paris, France. He had made an art film called El Topo, which was very well received. And this man over this transatlantic phone line claimed that he had the backing and the rights to make a feature film of Dune.
And he loved Dan's work that he did on designing the special effects for Dark Star. And he knew he had to do it at a budget with some creative people. So he hired Dan to work on it, help him with the storyline and also with the special effects. And Dan went off within a few weeks. He went off to Paris and France and places and was working on the Dune project there for 6 months.
And I wasn't the only person there. He had gone to England and he had plucked up an artist who did covers for science fiction books named Christopher Foss. And for the first time, I saw somebody whose stuff I liked as much as Ron Cobb's stuff. He had another artist he wanted me to meet. He had seen this guy's work in a show that was in Paris at the time. Took me over to one of the really fancy hotels in Paris, not the one I was staying in, where this artist named Hans Rudi Giger was staying while his show was on display in Paris. Giger brings out this little tinfoil. He said, "Would you like some opium?" I said, "Why do you take that?" He said, "I am afraid of my visions." He said, "It's only your mind." He said, "That is what I'm afraid of." He brings out a book, an art book, with his paintings in it. I started looking at this, and he and Alejandro go into a big discussion about Dune. I started looking at these paintings, and it took a minute for it to register what I was seeing, but what I was seeing seemed to be very disturbing.
Oft-told story of that was Dan, of course, working on the Jodorowsky Dune in Paris for a year or two, and it all collapsed, and he went home with no money and whatever it is, and slept on Ron Shussett's couch.
And I was in desperation. The only thing I could think to do, I had to sell a script.
So he said, now light up the board, Ron. I've got this first act, and you like it. And he says, I know, you have a good mind from these just weeks and weeks I've worked with you before I left, and what I saw you did on Total Recall, which you did the short story. As far as you got it, I know you can make the breakthrough for me.
Well, Star Beast is one of those titles that you think of, and then you throw them away. I was running through titles, and they all stank. I didn't like any of them. One morning at 3 o'clock, Ronnie's apartment, I'm typing away, writing dialogue, and the characters are saying the alien this and the alien that, and suddenly that word alien just sort of came up out of the typewriter at me. I said, alien. It's a noun and it's an adjective. I said, yes, that's it. I have the title.
It's simple. It's one word, and no one's ever used it. And never changed from that moment on. No one ever tried. The title stuck, and that was amazing to us, even just that aspect of it.
I went to storage, got my typewriter out, took it over to Ronnie Shussett's living room, and wrote it up. Over the days and nights of the next 3 months, Ron keeping me alive by feeding me hot dogs.
Dan said, somehow the monster has to get on board the ship in a way that'll amaze everybody. And so I woke up in the middle of the night and I said, Dan, I have an idea. And he said, what? And I said, the monster screws one of the people. He says, what? What are you talking about? I said, he jumps in his face, plants a tube down him, inserts his seed in him, and later it comes bursting out of his stomach. And Dan goes, oh, my God, it's the most amazing thing I've ever heard. Nobody's ever seen anything like that. And we just sat up all night and we wrote, and in 3 weeks, we had I would say, which is 85% of the plot, the structure. We didn't write the screenplay right there, of what you saw it became Alien, 85%.
And whether they drew from other movies, they probably did, like everybody. They drew consciously or self-consciously from things like The Terror from Beyond Space, but they actually, the ingredient of this thing being incubated in a human being made the whole damn thing stand out.
Ronnie wanted to be on board once I had written the thing. He saw it as a, you know, a viable thing he wanted to be involved with. So we made ourselves a little deal. He would be on board as producer, and we started trotting it around and showing it to various, you know, producing entities. And we got pretty close to deals in a couple of times, but they fell through, well, essentially because the people on the other end were demanding too much. You know, they were trying to screw us.
So we went to Roger Corman's company. But then I think we were dealing with Bob Reamy, who later became head of Universal. Corman was out of town. And he said, yes. So, right, that looks like a pretty amazing success story. He loved that Dan's movie was good, even though it didn't make money. He knew that I co-wrote this with Dan, though I'd never made a movie in my life because I took my name off the other. And we were going to make a deal, but we didn't get to signing the papers. Or Alien would have been made as a low-budget Corman movie.
A friend of ours named Mark Haggard ended up with a copy of it in his hands. He used to be an independent writer-director.
Mark said, can I read this great script they're all talking about you have? And Dan said, sure. So, you know, we gave him the script, and he just said, let's just wait a few days, and then we'll close our deal with Corman. Well, he calls us, of course, the same night. He said, it's great, it's live, and I can get the money. I can get the money immediately. So we looked at each other, and we said, okay, well, look, we can't wait. We don't want to blow the deal with Corman. It's got to be a limited time. He said, 2 weeks. Give me 2 weeks.
Mark Haggard knew Walter Hill, a director of tough guy movies. Gave it to Walter Hill. Walter Hill showed it to his partner, David Giler, and then they showed it to their third partner, Gordon Carroll. The three of them had just formed a new production company called Brandywine Films.
We had offices at the then Goldwyn Studios, now Warner Hollywood, and Walter's office was on the first floor, ground floor. And after lunch one day, he was sitting in his chair, ruminating, with the window open. And a friend of his was walking down the alleyway, and he stopped and said, Walter.
This guy handed him the script through the window, and he read it, and he said, well, I may be out of my mind. He said, I think this, he says, but I mean, the script is terrible, but it has one great scene in it, and read it and tell me what you think. I read it, and I thought it was absolutely terrible. And I called him up, and I said, well, you are nuts. This is crazy. Would you come to the big scene? I said, yeah, you think jumps out, and it's on his face. He said, that's not it. I said, look, I'm already on page 90. I said, he said, keep reading. And I came to the chest burster, and I called him back and said, well, I see what you mean.
They brought it to me. I thought it was interesting. A nice horror picture in outer space. I mean, what could sound better? And they then completely rewrote the script from top to bottom.
What I didn't understand when we made the deal with Brandywine, Giler and Hill, was that Giler and Hill wanted more than to produce this film. They, I didn't figure this out until, in fact, after principal photography. But they targeted my script since they decided they wanted all the credit for the screenplay, and they didn't want me to have any.
Right from the beginning, David and Walter did several drafts. And it was the whole character of the film, not the spine of it in terms of story, even though that was changed quite a bit. But the whole character of the film changed when Walter and David took it over.
As Walter himself said in one of the speeches he gave us during pre-production, he said, the greatest thing I have to bring to this project is I don't know anything about science fiction, and I don't like it. And that was certainly reflected in the various drafts that they did.
They took several cracks at drafts, and they, from all consensuses, they were getting worse, not better, because that wasn't their forte. They did recognize it was great, but they weren't good at making it better, or in fact at not making it even worse. To agree, I'm going to modify that with one exception. They made a huge contribution. But in the many drafts they did, most people felt it was losing. But that happens sometimes because you take a shot and then you sometimes come back to what attracted you in the first place. And they did radically. They did 8 different drafts.
For some reason, I couldn't figure out. Walter Hill immediately started doing rewrites of my script. I remember walking into Gordon Carroll's office and seeing a script on the desk and lifting up the page, and it said Alien by Walter Hill. Gordon walks in. I said, Gordon, what's this? Gordon looked very embarrassed. He said, oh, you're not supposed to see that.
But they contributed one thing, which is one of the best things in the movie, and I will eternally be thankful to them, not only for starting the ball for financing, but to contributing this to the movie. What they invented was the robot. That was not in the movie, where the robot's Ash is a robot and his head comes off. That whole idea and scenario was theirs.
We rewrote it top to bottom. I mean, all of the dialogue, all the characters, the whole sense of truck drivers in space, the whole, you know, plot with the robot, the whole with Ian Holm, with all the rest of that stuff. That's all in the new script.
The only thing I could see he was doing was just stirring around the elements. First thing he did was change the names of all of the characters. One early discussion, Walter walks into the offices there at 20th Century Fox, and he said, I hate all those names in your script. He hates all the names. I mean, how do you hate a name? Oh, I hate all those names. So he changed them all. Of course, he didn't hate them at all, but he had the naive idea that if he changed all of the characters' names, this would count somehow as being a substantial rewrite of the material.
With a story that's as often told as this kind of story is, you have to do it in a special way in order for it to be special. I mean, that's was our argument with you know, about the movie in general with Fox all the time, and I think they agreed, which was that you had to treat this kind of B monster movie as though it were an A movie.
That script did not excite Fox enough for them to say, we want to go ahead and we want to make it. It must be remembered that this was pre-Star Wars. And we were confident, although we had other places we could set the film up, we were confident that Fox would ultimately, with another rewrite and whatever, would ultimately do it. We certainly hoped so. And when Star Wars came out and was the extraordinary hit that it was, then suddenly science fiction became the hot genre.
I don't know that there was a consensus one way or the other about science fiction. I mean, since I was the responsible party for making Star Wars, and it was such a hit, concerns about science fiction went away very quickly.
They wanted to follow through on Star Wars, and they wanted to follow through fast, and the only spaceship script they had sitting on their desk was Alien. So they green-lighted it. Wham.
There were only 7 or 8 people in the whole movie. So Ridley had said to me one day, he said, I'm going to cast every other role with the most brilliant actor I can that doesn't need help from me, because I'm going to concentrate on the visual style.
We had wanted not to use a classic star for the film.
When you see, and talk, and people read and read and read, and there's always one that suddenly goes bang, that's the one.
Ridley Scott had asked me to cast his first film, which was The Duelists, and we'd worked together really well, and it was very enjoyable. So, totally different from Aliens. It was Napoleonic Wars, full of character actors.
First of all, I felt I wanted to see every actor in the United States in the directory. Okay, so I think we did see every actor in the United States, in Los Angeles, New York.
It was about as far removed as you could get from his first film, because the script was very, very linear. It was very few stage directions. You could not tell who was a man and who was a woman. I sensed deliberately.
We wrote it to be all men. So I'm getting everybody their due. There's a lot of people that had to make some good guesses here. I think maybe that's the only way most of the really great movies get made. But there's somebody in each spot that's doing something amazing, and you don't think of it, and wow, it makes it it's part of what makes it magic.
David Giler and Walter, who sort of took over the, the writing from Ron and from Dan, I think they came up, I'm not sure whether it was David or not, idea of sort of to try and break the mold of making Ripley a woman, and of kind of making it more, I mean, the truck drivers in space analogy I think is a pretty good one, and that appealed to Ridley because, the thing that didn't appeal to him as an art director was sort of, shiny Flash Gordon surfaces and things like that. He wanted the thing to be just like a battered old truck where there was bits of tape over cracks in the chairs they sat in and things like that.
And we realized that studios might resist it. Even though we went to Corman first, we thought that Fox might not make the movie unless we managed to make it as commercial as possible. So we had a little asterisk. Please note, any one of the crew members, or let's say 2, could be females if you want to have it go for a wider, broader appeal. But to all truth, we did not in any way remotely conceive the idea that the lead, Ripley, would be a woman.
We were looking it over, and Walter and I sort of thought, here's this one character, not too interesting, and we thought, this studio, this is made, I hate to say this, but for very cynical reasons, this studio is making Julia and Turning Point, and they really believe in the return of the woman's movie. But we get a lot of points, if we turn this character into a woman, and it'll just make the character more interesting.
She wasn't originally in the original script. Originally, the protagonist was a male.
So Laddie said to us one day, can Ripley be a woman? And we looked at each other, we said, yeah, but it seems kind of funny. I mean, they've never done that, a woman in a space horror movie as the leading character. And he said, well, I have a feeling that's going to make it unique.
And we started going through lists of actresses and who was right for the role. You have to remember that Sigourney Weaver in those days was not a big star, and she tested for the part.
I got this audition. They'd sent me the script, which, of course, not knowing the Ramboldi designs, I pictured this big yellow blob of gelatin chasing these people, and nothing as elegant as what it turned out to be. And I actually went to the wrong place. And I called my agent and I said, it was like Friday afternoon. I said, I don't know, I mean, the script was, she said, just go.
I'd met Sigourney on the last go in New York. She'd come recommended because of a play that she'd been doing on Broadway. She was known as a real comer on Broadway, right? And I didn't see the play, I just met her.
As I remember, we were in the Regency Hotel at the time. Sigourney, for some reason, had gone to another hotel. We did not know this. And she was due at, 2:30, and 2:30 arrives, and 2:45 arrives. 10 minutes to 3 arrives, and then we hear, I can't say running feet in the corridor, but we hear fast-paced feet coming toward the door and then slowing down and composing itself, and the bell rings, and Mary opens the door, and Ripley was standing there. This extraordinary-looking woman, tall, commanding presence.
And I was wearing these very high hooker boots, and I looked about 7 feet tall.
In a very nerve-wracking situation, projecting composure, but you knew that just 1/8 of an inch behind that composure was a very nervous actress, a very tense actress. And that was exactly right for we knew, David and I knew immediately.
I was very impressed by her, height, and she's a very impressive character, very intelligent, and seemed to make sense to me. So I expressed this to Laddie, who said, yeah, but you got a test. And I said, but I'm 3 weeks from principal photography.
And we got to do what was basically a run-through of the movie with the real kind of set, and I was afraid it would be like me and a potted palm, and I'd have to go. But he gave me this whole run-through, which as an actor I really appreciated.
Sigourney was the last one to get cast. The sets, the test I shot in were the sets I was building. That was the Nostromo. We didn't rattle that together. I was actually building, so it was scary.
What I didn't like about it that much was my performance, because I think I was trying to be tough instead of just what I discovered in the course of this, which was my first film, basically, was you don't try to, you just play each scene for what it is instead of trying to work on an arc. The people aren't consistent. They would be different in a love scene than they would be as they're fighting an alien.
They screen tested many people, but she was dynamite. You saw it right there in the screen test, as you saw later in the movie. This was her very first film. It's all behind the eyes.
My intuition, always in casting, is from the second they walk through the door. When I would see somebody walk through that door, I knew somehow this was her.
Then there was the second woman, Lambert, but it was a difficult one to finally arrive at Veronica Cartwright. I can't remember the films she'd been in before, but she played a way out, weird sort of character. And she had a particular intensity and unconventional looks, which made her very, very right for it.
I went on an interview in Los Angeles, and I met with the casting people there. Originally, I had read for Ripley, and I was called back, and I read again for Ripley with Ridley there. Then I was due to go over to England. So I had gone over for vacation. So I talked to my agent before I left, and I said, are they still casting for Alien? I mean, I might as well go see them again, or at least let them know that I'm here. So I went in again, and I read again while I was there. And then I found out, I come home, but I find out I get it. So I go over thinking I'm doing the part of Ripley. Nobody bothered told me that I was doing the part of Lambert until they called to do wardrobe. And they said, well, you need to come in and to get your gear and stuff for Lambert. And I said, oh, I'm not playing Lambert, I'm playing Ripley. Oh, no, that part's been cast. So I said, well, wait a minute. I haven't even read this script from another perspective. So here I am in England. I call back my agent. I said, aren't I doing Ripley? And he said, yes. And I said, well, they said that I'm doing Lambert. So I said, well, I'm going to have to reread this script and see. So I reread it, and it bothered me a lot that she was so weepy all the time. I mean, every time she seemed, but they convinced me that I was the audience's fears. I was reflection of what the audience is feeling.
What you wanted to avoid all the way through was these people looking like just ordinary, bland, nice, middle-of-the-road, middle-class people. That would not have... They had to be vivid. You know, you were stuck with them in this capsule, or whatever you want to call it, for a long time, and they had to be vivid and very clearly defined.
When I read Alien initially, I wasn't drawn to the project. Ridley wasn't attached. It was, my understanding was going to be a $2 or $3 million budget on it. And I thought, well, you're not going to make an effective film for that. And, you know, it's a nice piece of material, has potential, but you're not giving it that potential. And that, I thought, was that. And about a month later, I got a call from England, one of the producers at the time, and told me that Ridley was going to be directing it and that there was a budget that would realize the potential. And then it became something else. It became working with Ridley Scott and learning about filmmaking.
What Ridley's vision, as far as the actors were concerned, was he wanted it very much to be not of any time or any world. So it was important there was a mixture of nationalities. I cannot remember if Yaphet Kotto's character was written as such, but he was obviously perfect for that part because he's so vivid, a wonderful actor.
When I first met Ridley, the first meeting we had, I said, I don't like science fiction films or monster pictures. I opened with that, which was obviously a good opening. And he said, well, actually, I don't either, but I think I can make something of this one.
The casting of John Hurt, I think it is known that there was another actor originally playing that part, John Finch, who became ill, and we had to recast.
Probably identified at that moment very strongly by playing Macbeth for Polanski. I'd been impressed by Polanski's work anyway, but particularly also by Finch. And so he said, yeah, sure, I'd love to do this. He came on board. First day, first shot, he starts to look as yellow as this pencil. And I thought, God, what's wrong? And we did a couple of takes, and he seemed absolute lackluster, no energy. He's sagging in his seat, and we cut. And I got up and went over to him and said, what's up, you all right? He said, no, I'm terrible. I said, I feel terrible. He said, how do I look? I said, terrible. And we had to lift him out of his seat, and he was carried away. And it turns out that he was a diabetic.
I had been asked if I'd like to do Alien, but I had already committed to the South African film. So that was dropped. And the actor that was going to play Kane later, for one reason or another, had to drop out.
That night, we had a quick regroup in the office. And that night, I drove to Hampstead Village and met with John Hurt.
And then they heard that I was then free. So Ridley Scott came to me, and we talked till gone midnight, say, on the Monday.
Prepared him, of course, for what it was, and he said, so when do I start? And I said, tomorrow morning.
And on the Tuesday morning, I was on the set at 7:30. So it was not a usual film for me. The script didn't arrive, and I didn't mull it over, and I didn't decide this, that, and the other. I had a long pitch from Ridley, and a very interesting one, too. And by the end of it, I said, okay, Ridley, you better send the car around now to take me out to the studio.
I think life and acting and everything is so full of those things. What if it hadn't happened? Like, nobody knows. I think John Hurt would probably still have exactly the same career because he's done so much varied and wonderful work. That really brings us to Ian Holm, who I think is the most wonderful actor and hadn't done anything like that at all before. And Ridley was really thrilled that he wanted to do it. And in those days, he'd done very little film. He'd done a bit of television, but he was really very much a theatre star.
Casting was extensive, and even though it's only for 7 people, at the end of the day, I think it's a pretty definitive cast.
The casting is enormously important to the whole making of the film, to the director's concept of the film, because it does so much work for the director, just innately in who you cast. It gives the director so much to work with, or not, if it's not properly cast. So it is an extraordinarily sort of subtle skill that's difficult to explain, but people who know about filmmaking understand it, and audiences who don't know about it appreciate it without always understanding what they're appreciating.
I wrote Alien thinking I was going to direct it. That's one of the reasons that I hadn't developed the characters. I mean, it was such, developing the alien itself was such a complex problem that I thought, well, I'll put the characters off for a later draft.
It went, as most things do, through a period of trying to get a package. But this, when you're going with the studios, they offer top dollar, they went to everybody. Every top A-level actor and director.
We had asked Walter at first place if he wanted to direct it. And since he was part of the package.
Walter was originally going to do it. And then he decided that he did not have the temperament for special effects.
Apparently Gordon talked to Robert Aldrich. Didn't like what Aldrich had to say. He asked Aldrich how he would handle the face-hugging creature. Aldrich said, oh, no problem. I'll just go to the market and get a liver and throw it on the guy's face. Gordon didn't want to hear that.
I was convinced that it wasn't a small picture, that the way to do it was to scale it up and to do it with whatever sense of craft and design and to make it an A picture.
Peter Gates, the studio wanted. We weren't crazy about that idea, but I think he didn't want to do it finally. I talked to Jack Clayton about it, and he didn't want to do it.
And everybody said no, because they said, we had no credibility, and of course directors would have credibility, but almost none of them wanted to do it. They thought it was a stupid monster movie, a dumb thing with something coming out of your chest like a Japanese horror movie. And none of them had the vision. None of the A-level directors we went to had the vision to see it.
You needed to have a director that was going to give it some kind of real, other than traditional science fiction look. You had to have real actors in it. You had to have, you know, all of that. And never let on that it was a B monster movie, but make it deliver on that, at that level.
In those days, I think between The Duelist, which had been something that was completely driven by myself and my pocketbook, because I found the writer, found the story, paid for the script, got no fee, and was the completion bond. So that was my first experience in the movie business.
I saw The Duelists at Cannes and talked to Sandy Lieberson, who knew Ridley pretty well, who was the head of, Sandy was head of Fox in Europe. And we kind of presented him as the candidate.
Walter Hill and I went, screened the picture that he had done, and The Duelists. We were absolutely stunned by his control of the picture, his mounting of the film. It really is an extraordinary film with a lot of depth, richness.
All of a sudden, they said that they had met with a director none of us had heard of, named Ridley Scott, who was a director of commercials from England. I said, what has he done? I said, he did a film called The Duelists. And they screened it for us. Very nice looking picture. I couldn't see what it had to do with science fiction, but they weren't looking at it from that perspective, and they may have had a point.
Someone had seen The Duelist at Cannes, which got a prize at Cannes. And out of the blue came this offer. I think it must have been within about 6 months, actually. And I read the script, and I think within 26 hours I was standing in Hollywood. I read the script, said, I'll do it. They said, you will? I said, yeah. So I was flown out. So I suddenly started to feel the Hollywood machine kicking in.
I think it is really clever casting, in actual fact, the fact that somebody who's obviously got a good eye and also would give a completely different quality to what could have been a very sort of, maybe an exciting, but nonetheless a B movie.
That first encounter was good, and then I went back and said, what I have to do is storyboard the movie. So with great excitement and glee, I storyboarded the movie in London, which actually took me 3.5 weeks. I worked day and night, went back with the boards, and the budget doubled, which just shows the power of a well-thought-through storyboard, because we went from 4.2 to 8.4 or something like that, because they suddenly saw a way to do the film which was, you know, not doing it in a bunch of sets that looked like painted cardboard boxes with a dodgy man in a rubber suit running around as the Beast, but in fact I'd put a statement into it. I had I don't like the word, but had a vision of what to do with the spacecraft and what to do with the spacesuits, and I was fully influenced at that moment, mostly by 2001, actually. Oh, and Star Wars. I thought that first Star Wars was formidable. But that was the fairy story, you see. Star Wars is the fairy story. I was going to do the Texas Chainsaw Massacre of science fictions, which I still think Texas is one of the most formidable. If you're going to do a horror movie, there it is.
Being a horror film and a sci-fi fanatic, I kept sort of saying, well, this is a film you've got to see, because he hadn't really seen many of those things, and I think, so I was trying to sort of, in my own naive way, educate him as to, well, this is a sci-fi great, Ridley, you've got to see this, you know. You've got to see It, the Terror from Beyond Space, or all that sort of thing, and Ridley sort of looked at them as sort of an absolute horror, because he wasn't excited by any of them. I think the only thing he was excited by was Texas Chainsaw Massacre, actually.
I always felt it was a pretty straightforward action thriller. The old dark house, basically. And we're going to watch them each get taken out by this terrible beast. That's as B movie as you can get.
Whoever directed this movie, you know, was not going to quit on a monster until he has it, that you can believe it, that it'll look right. And I thought that was the single most important thing you could have for this movie.
The thing that really worried me most of all, because I figured I could get all the environment right, all the costumes right, you can get the casting right. But who was this beast? What was this beast going to be? And that's where we started talking, you know, in great detail about Giger.
Ridley did one thing which enamored him to me. First time I met him, I shoved Giger's art book into his hands.
And I saw the Giger illustrations of that one in Necronomicon, which I thought, that's it, that's no question, that's it. I talked at length with Dan O'Bannon on this, and he said, what do you think? I said, that's it. He said, that's right.
And the idea that came to me looking at Giger's paintings was, you know, if somebody could get this guy to design a monster movie, you'd have something completely original no one had ever seen before.
But Fox hated Giger's work because they said, people stay away in droves. This is so ghastly. It's too much. It's too much. It's repulsive. And we said, no, it's done so beautifully. It all depends on the way the director utilizes it.
It's the first question you ask, what is the alien going to look like? Is it going to be a guy in a rubber suit with fins? And Dan opened Necronomicon, Giger's book, and we were just stunned. Same thing with Ridley. The first second that Ridley saw Giger's work, he knew that the biggest single design problem, maybe the biggest problem in the film, had been solved.
I just thought it was stunning, and I just stuck to my guns saying, no, no, that's it. And they said, but let's bring him in and talk some concepts. I said, no, you can't do that. That's it. We want to be shooting by so-and-so. That's it. Just to get this right is going to be incredibly difficult. This is beautiful, not just threatening, and also has very sexual connotations. So in everything, it's like a rather beautiful humanoid, biomechanoid insect. So then I flew to Zurich because old Giger will not get on a jet. Terrified of flying. I think he's probably still terrified of flying. And I met him at his house, and I found him to be very nice and very sweet and very articulate and very specific. And he started going down this thing, and I'll redesign. I said, no. So we went through the same conversation again. I said, you don't need to. You've got 5 other things to design. Right through from egg, facehugger, chestburster, and then, what's that? 3. Then the beast.
I didn't want to have eyes because it makes the monster more dangerous. It's more scary, and because you never know where the monster is looking. This is the painting, the old alien that Ridley Scott wanted to have for his film, and that called Necronom number 4, and I did it in 1976. The only thing in the alien is the difference is that they have kind of sunglasses. Now we have this kind of shell, and here the tail, it's different. And yeah, also the other things like these tubes, and this is like the alien. First, it was only a short time I should draw the monster. I did this here in Zurich, and then I had to come, then I haven't heard anything, and then I had to come to England. So he said, please come over for 3 or 4 weeks. And then at the end, I was about 5 months there, I think. Altogether, 7 months. Ridley wants that I do the 3 monsters. That was the facehugger, the chestburster, and the big alien. And then later on, I could do the rest of the surrounding of the alien.
I was using Dune as my model of how to design a science fiction movie, the idea of getting great artists together in a room and having them all work. And we were doing that on Alien. It was me in charge instead of Jodorowsky. And we had the walls full of these dazzling designs for everything in the movie.
He had a kind of a wish list of people he wanted to work on this film. One was Hans-Rudi Giger, myself, and Chris Foss, the British science fiction illustrator. And he always had this dream project that all 3 of us would work on this one film, and he got his way. And even before there was a director, Chris and I had a series of little art department above an old soundstage on Fox for a long, long time, drawing and meeting directors as they would come in and look at the drawings and try to find out who was going to do what and when and where and if it would ever go.
I knew Ron as a political cartoonist from the Los Angeles Free Press. Everybody loved his cartoons. And I had the gall to actually call him on the phone and go visit him in his apartment in Westwood. We became friends that way. And I discovered something that at that time was not known about him, that he did science fictional paintings. And they were incredible.
Dan came to me with the script, the original script that he and Ron Shusett had written for Alien, and had me read it, and it was quite amazing. I was quite, and he wondered if I could help him do some visualizations, a series of paintings that he could send around with the script, and I did. Quite a few, and but we were still groping as to what the thing should look like. But I was very, very interested in astronautics and space flight and aerospace design and ideas of the future, and also science fiction as a kind of future mythology. So all this just clicked with me, and I was very, very excited about it. We all contributed all kinds of things for the different versions of the script, and Chris Voss just turned out tons and tons of exterior drawings of what the ship should look like. And we kind of differed in that he was very metaphorical and sort of fantastic, and I was very interested in tapping the idea of what things could look like if they were drawn from a more realistic consideration of what a spaceship should be, without going NASA. Create the sense of confined space, spaces at a premium inside, that the idea that it was, with all the pressure doors, that it was pressurized, all those things I thought would contribute to the tension of the film. And they weren't particularly there in the in a lot of the early versions and visions of what it should look like. So I had to do a lot of persuading.
Ron Cobb was going to do the monster, and he had some drawings and all the rest of that stuff. And Ron's a real talented guy, and ended up doing a lot of the ship, but his monster was not too hot.
He kind of designed the sort of spaceship interiors and thing. I think the sort of Nostromo and the Narcissus, he did those kind of designs because he had, I mean, he's rather like Sid Mead was to Blade Runner. He just had that expert. They were founded in logic, you know, and reality.
This guy thinks like something's engineered. He's got a mind that he designed something that really seems like it'll work, a functioning model. He's so believable. He can make them so accurate.
I was more concerned with the Nostromo, because I knew that was going to be my ultimate contribution, would be to bring the Nostromo to life. When finally we would get Giger on board, and not just having him mail things in, he would be involved with the alien planet and the alien. We all knew that that's what Dan wanted, you know. Chris Voss was to sort of take care of the exterior of the ship, and I was going to do the interior sets. There would be a production designer, but Dan wanted all our inputs to be very much noted.
I used to be very into the Metal Hurlant, the heavy metal comics from France, and all the Mobius and people like that. And I think I'd managed to infect Ridley with that enthusiasm, etc. He could treat sci-fi in the same way that he treated history, you know, like the Duelists. Before that, he was the sort of he was the expert at everything. He put a different slant on shooting historical things. Because it was just, I guess it was his eye for detail, really.
I was steeped in heavy metal comics of those at that particular time, like Metal Hurlant and you know, a lot of Mobius's stuff actually. And I was very impressed by that. And I just in those days trying to wonder, how do I apply this to movies? You know, how do I apply this kind of really fresh and beautifully visual thinking to film? And here it was. You need a hook when you're starting something, and my hook was my boards. I drew the boards, drew the corridors, drew the spacesuits. When you're drawing boards and corridors and spacesuits, you're also sucking yourself into story, because I'm literally doing it, you know, chapter by chapter, scene by scene. You get ideas as you're drawing them, and the ideas fall into place not just as ideas, but as technological possibilities. And when that first idea comes, I tend to go with it and follow it.
29 and take one.
No. Cue the bed.
The production designer was Mike Seymour, who'd worked with Ridley on commercials and things. Well, I seem to remember he had two art directors under him who've gone on to pretty good things. There was a guy called Les Dilley, who's now a production designer in his own right, and there was Roger Christian.
Yeah, well, production designer is kind of in charge. He's head of the band, really, and works closely with the director and eventually with the cameraman. We managed to pull together this really good team, but it was hard work. And I remember a time when we were doing 7-day weeks in the art department because we started shooting, we were building all the time. I think I seem to remember we had something like 120 construction crew working for the best part of 6 months.
The production designer, the concept designers who were in there were generally tense because of me. I don't think anybody else was leaning on them about anything, not even Ridley. But I was. I looked at everything that came out of that art department to see how closely it adhered to the designs that I had bled over. And when it didn't, I was very, very pushy.
I guess the only unconventional thing was that Dan was always there, going from drawing to drawing, and he was really shepherding this thing. And I don't know that they were used to that, because Dan meddled a lot, but he really cared about the movie, and it was Ridley that gave him the license to do it, because Ridley liked Dan's advice and his input, so the writer. Ron Shusett was there as well. So the writers had quite a presence on the picture, even though Walter Hill and David Giler wrote another version of the movie.
Les was taking care of the planet and the alien exterior craft and interior and the jockey, etc. Roger was in charge of everything to do with the Nostromo. And that's when I suddenly realized that 8.2 was nothing.
The whole idea of the main sort of set, and Ridley discusses me, was that he wanted the opening to be rather like being aboard the Marie Celeste, the famous ship which was found drifting somewhere with evidence that people had been on it, but there's no evidence of the people.
Ridley saw the ship very much as a metaphor for a Gothic castle or a World War II submarine, or something that still goes on in sci-fi movies, a kind of retro, accessible technology with great big transistors and very low-res video screens and everything. There's always a kind of a comfort zone there, because we all knew that even though they weren't readily available, that they would obviously have things like flat screens and there'd be high resolution, but no, we did it, with great big switches.
And I wanted to have wafer-thin screens that are plexiglass, that just float on clips. And of course today you've got computer screen is exactly like that. It's like plexiglass. Because I figured that's where it would go. But I really got those things of Jean-Giraud Mobius, when he would be drawing and speculating. A lot of his stuff you see 30 years ago is now.
The ship is a strange mixture of retrofitted old technology, a kind of an industrial nightmare, like being trapped in a factory or something. And so the way I wanted to go along with that was I talked them into all these industrial symbols around and color coding of everything. I thought that would be kind of cynical and create that industrial revolution feel, of people getting lost in machines, which I knew was part of the metaphor. Some of them were semi-humorous, so I was hoping people would notice where that black meant a vacuum, and that and artificial gravity meant a red line underneath, and if there was no artificial gravity and it was black beyond this door, it meant don't open it, and so there was a figure of a little space person floating upside down, and stuff like that, sort of in stress. So I don't know, it went in all these directions, but somehow it all fit together. Ridley made it all fit together, and I mean, Ridley he's a wonderful artist, and he wanted it to look a lot like a Mobius designed ship with all kinds of rounded surfaces and with an Egyptian motif.
Ron Cobb was very good with the sort of mechanical device things, and had already had some concepts, because before it got to us, I think Dan O'Bannon and Ron Shusett had sort of worked out some ideas.
I originally strongly suggested an idea of a ship that was very bizarre. It was all kind of a big hammerhead that tumbled to create gravity, and as it moved along, and and it was just too weird for anyone who could quite understand it. And so I wanted to kind of avoid the idea that spacecraft are just big airplanes that fly through a night sky.
Ron Cobb was of immense value to us. Ayan is a brilliant science fiction draftsman, and he has a mind that analyzes the situations that we used to throw at him. So the look of Alien is a combination of his very methodical science fiction mind, where he would create vehicles as they should be and as they would fly, and Giger's dark kind of symbiosis of the sexual and mechanical paintings. Those two things Ridley fused into one image, which was how we did Alien. I worked a lot with Les Dilly. Les was always an art director in charge of the construction and how things were made, and I was, because I went through set decorating, and basically I developed this usage of scrap. On Star Wars we didn't have a very high budget and we couldn't afford to make all the sets, so I developed this idea of breaking down jet engines and scrap metal and things, and we developed the way how to make it look real, which is an art in itself.
So we visited a bomber graveyard of aircraft, and there's Canberra bombers and Spitfires and Wellington bombers and all falling apart. And we went out. Roger said, if I buy 2 of those scrap metal, we sell off the titanium because that's too expensive. We can dismantle. It'll take me a month to dismantle this, and we'll put him in organized pieces on shelves, and we can go in and we can make sculptural corridors. Then when that's right, then you can give me an okay on, let's say I do 6 feet, and you can come and have a look and say, yeah, I like that 6 feet. Because then once you've got that, then it can be repetition down that length of corridor. And we just worked on it that way, and it looked like it flew.
People would come on the set and just walk around and be amazed. They thought they were in a ship that was working. And I think that's the big contribution to the world of science fiction that really we made together as a team.
344, take 7, A and B.
Where Harry Dean Stanton and Yaphet Kotto were working, they were sort of like the rude mechanicals down in the basement, arguing about their union rights and things like that. And it was Ridley's idea, actually, was that we built a long corridor, but to make it look longer, we put a mirror in at the far end, so slightly angled, so it looked like the corridor went down and then it went off like that. And it worked. Trick. Good trick.
I was staring at the landing leg and H, because we used the same landscape then. Later, I said, I want to build a landing leg to show the scale of the Nostromo. So we built this 58-foot landing leg foot, which still didn't look big enough. And so I thought, make up 3 tiny spacesuits. This will look twice as big. And so they did, and we put one of the cameraman's kids in one suit, and Jake and Luke went into the other suits, and because it was high, I literally shackled them on. So they were on, so they couldn't move. And if you overcrank, when they get off and walk, of course, they become adults.
Suddenly the spaceship leg was like doubled in scale, so it made it absolutely massive. There were the inevitable tensions between 20th Century Fox and Ridley and everything like that, because Ridley was pushing the envelope. I mean, designing sets that had kind of, one hadn't seen sets like that sort of at that time since Kubrick and 2001. I mean, absolutely incredible. A tribute to the Shepard Plaster department, as though all those Giger sculptures kind of and sets brought to life were absolutely amazing.
Gradually down the line, I realized it made a lot of sense to have Giger design everything that was to do with the Alien. That includes the landscape and the spacecraft, and then everything that was earthly, then it would be Michael Seymour and his team, right? And so that made a lot of sense, 2 separate brains working on 2 different worlds.
I did some drawings. So Ridley Scott liked to have the exterior landscape, the space jockey, the Exilo, exterior, interior, all the alien surroundings. And I was very happy to do that because I was not so limited. They had not money to do it like I designed it. You know, the whole thing looks a little bit like Art Nouveau. It was not organic enough, organic-like. It looked like handmade from artists. The eggs have been very good. They look real organic. Yeah, the eggs and the area where the eggs have been. And also the walls, they have been very good because this was planned to go in the Exilo. There was a round, like a throw, and that was very nice. I thought bones, yeah, they are dried and old, but they brought this fresh from the slaughterhouse, and there was a smell horrible because the inside of the bones that was just fresh, and we had a big box full of bones, and there was such a smell that we even myself, I wouldn't see that as a, please go away with this. I only used dried bones, old, together with plasticine to do it. The scale was not wrong, it was too big. We couldn't find tubes and things of this size, so that didn't work very well. So Ridley always used smoke, everything dark and smoke, and that makes the thing much better than it is. I want to have a landscape who is very much organic-like, and I would like to have old motors from motorcycle or things like that, big things to make a wonderful landscape, but there was no time and no money for this. A real mixed up, a real biomechanical landscape, that would be good.
Giger's sets were so erotic, and I mean, his big vaginas and penises, and I mean, it's like, you know, the whole thing is like you're going inside of some sort of womb or whatever. I mean, it's sort of visceral and all of those things, and I think all those elements came into it, and that's what makes it really work.
On the so-called space jockey, which Giger, by the way, designed that whole set, the alien, and he hand-brushed the alien, airbrushed it himself, and got on a scaffold and airbrushed the whole set so it would have that eerie texture. But the thing was this: they didn't want to give us, it was too expensive a set. They didn't want to give it to us. They said, well, look, you're only in here one time. It's different if you keep using this set. This is massively expensive. This whole big creature and this big back wall. They're saying, no, we can't give you this. It's absolutely too expensive. I think it was like $400,000 or $500,000. They said, this is not your main set. You're just going to have to walk by and see a skeletal imprint in the mud of this 15-foot creature. And then you'll walk into this strange-looking building. It doesn't have to have these immense walls. It'll be a bunker or something that's weirdly constructed at angles. And that's it. We can do that cheaper, and that's where we got to stop you. Some of these things, you're just going wild.
But the space jockey was one of those things I said, look, I can't cheat this, you know. It's got to be real. It's kind of the cockpit or the driving deck of whatever this craft was. And Giger had done this drawing, which I loved, and I said, this has got to be it.
But Ridley and I kept after him. He said, look, we need this because this is our Cecil B. DeMille shot. You got to have this so that when they see this, they know it's just not a little, like we were going to do a Roger Corman movie. You got to have the people walking in, not miniatures, camera pull back, and they're on this thing, and it's the most amazing set you've ever seen. Your jaw drops, and you know you're watching an A-level movie.
Really sort of was, you know, loved having sets, you know, so we would go on discussing ideas for sets and things, and so he would want something more, so I would get designed like storerooms and other pieces of action, and I kept building sets, and the guy from Fox was kind of very concerned about the fact we were running over schedule by like 4 weeks, was doing his best to stop that happening. So he would find out where I was building a set and have them pulled down, so we never got to shoot them. That happened on 2 or 3 occasions.
There's this set, which I think was an air shaft set or something, and there was this continual tussle with Ridley saying, I want that set, I want to shoot on that set. And Peter Beale would go around knowing exactly what Ridley was like. He'd discovered over the weeks of shooting, and he would actually do a sort of like a march around the studio and look at all the stages to make sure that all the sets that were being built, there was nothing that was being built without his approval. And I seem to remember it was this tussle of him saying, that is not going to be built, we're cancelling that set, and Ridley saying, no, build it, build it.
I mean, you know, it's one of those things that we could have gone on and on and on. You know, we'd have built other things and bigger things and more spaceship and more hidden crannies. I mean, there's whole sequences which were cut out. There's a sequence where initially the alien creature gets Scarrett, the captain, and then he cocoons him and he's stuck to a wall in one of the storerooms, and he's become sort of food for the alien creature, and he's just glued to the wall. There's no way she can rescue him, so she burns him.
Walking on those sets, walking on those stages, and seeing the richness of design and texture, it began to get to you, literally physically. And then, of course, when we started to shoot and Ridley pumped the smoke in there, you were now in ghostly surroundings. What one realized is that we were doing, that Ridley was bringing this picture to the highest possible creative level, design level, acting level, lighting level.
He was very strange looking, dressed all in black, you know, this Swiss accent. And when we were looking at his work before we met him, we weren't really sure we wanted to meet him. You know? We were kind of disturbed about, is he really going to be here? You know.
I like if they are disturbed. Yes, that's good. I hate if they don't look at it, or if I have people they like my stuff, or others they hate it.
He's a wonderful artist. I think that was a great move having him design the whole film.
He was so strange. Most people kept him the creeps. They wanted his office way across the room than the other because he was like Dracula. He was always Peter Lorre or something. He was always dressed in black, and he had very soft voice, but there was always these horrible stories. We heard that he had the skeleton from his fiancée who had committed suicide, and people gave him the creeps. I got along with him great. Dan and I and Ridley got along superbly. Everyone else sort of thought he was so weird that they didn't work with him too much. And as a result, that was good. It was great for Dan and I because we got so much input, getting along with him so well. People would kind of shy away from him. They'd say he was obsessed in his work. He had bones and of all kinds all over the place.
The light hurts me. If you have too much sun, you like then to be in the shadow, and I like always to be in the shadow, in the dark.
I liked him a lot. He had a girlfriend called Mia, and they both dressed in black. He was very pale-skinned as well, and he was sort of spooky in a way, but I also kind of liked him, and there was a sweet side to him. He brought his mother over, you know, and his mother had hip replacements, and so he would take her out. I remember having dinner out one evening with him and his mother and Mia, and Giger was, I mean, we spent a lot of time together.
The eggs were designed and obviously made, and they would be the way up they were with the aperture at the top, with a hydraulic opening, which would open looking very threatening, with Jimmy Shields' great sounds on it. It's still one of the great sounds that when it opens, and you hear that viscera, and the strength, you know it's strong. The detail that he looks at later would be shot at Bray when the film is finished. So we'd ship one of those eggs out to Bray, and to make it really strange, because if you watch carefully, the fluid on it is going upwards. So then you flip that over, and that always freaked them out when they saw that dripping upwards. And then inside it was semi-transparent, like a large piece of jelly. And all it was a fiberglass with mostly glass than fiber in it, so it's nearly transparent. And I needed it to move. When we were in Brisbane, we were in Bray, I kept looking, he's dead. To have sticks in poking, it looked terrible. So we worked out a method of, as it was about to open, it kind of went like that, lit a little bit. And then I think he looks at it again, and inside, are my hands with 2 rubber gloves on, washing up gloves. And all I'm doing is going like that. And so that was how that was done. And of course, after that, he comes in and looks into the aperture opens. He backs off. We say, don't go there. He goes there, looks in, and what he's staring at is what they call Nottingham lace, which is fundamentally cow's stomach. That lacy, fleshy stuff is we call tripe. And so I've got buckets of this in white plastic buckets, and I'd have to put on a white coat and gloves and handling this stuff, and I just dressed it on it. And then I couldn't find a whiplash effect of anything that you made, like a hose that was delicate enough. So I'd seen this intestine, sheep's intestine, which is actually beautiful. It's gossamer, got little lines in it. Well, it was in fragments, because all you do is cover the bits and then say, it's not enough to have him look and it explodes. You need every moment of it, and slowed down. So we slowed it down because it was really fast. You turn an airline on, it just goes whash. It happens in less than a second. Whereas I think we stretched that to maybe 1.5 seconds, maybe. And then it hits him as he goes back. I've already got it attached to his face. So you need that bridge between him coming in to look, him looking in, what he sees, and this is like that, explosion up into the camera, and cut where I've got this attached to his face as he falls backwards.
The face hugger, that was my first thing I did for Dan O'Banion when he sent me, I think, about $1,000 to do some paintings for Alien, and he gave me explanation and drawings, and he said that he's jumping on a big egg. This egg is about that, so, and I thought that must be quite a big monster, so I did an enormous face hugger, like a and he was jumping. I thought he could jump when his tail is curved like a spring devil or whatever, the Jack in the Box. Later on, he said I should do it smaller. So I think something with human hands is always scary, very scary. So I had the long fingers. What is the most important part on the face hugger, and then it's a part, there's a little sexual, like, yeah, and the tube for that this beast has to put in the mouth, and then I had these hands in front, and then Dan O'Banion drew them sideways. That was better.
I thought, you can't beat this. The real thing's always better. So then I had orders coming from a very good fishmongers in Shepparton Village who had oysters, clams, and other parts of fish, a little bit of sturgeon, a little bit of caviar. I got him to make a cup with a container in rubber, which is the facehugger with the tail, the stinger, the like manta ray tail, and the hands. That was all articulated. Inside it, this was just a receptacle, and I just put in, you know, with a pair of tweezers, put in 4 oysters, 1, 2, 3, 4, and put in a large kidney, and put in a so-and-so, so-and-so, and where you go. You can't do better than that. So you then poke at it with his you know, instrument, and the legs move, and it gives you a shot.
The chest burst, that was a very, very heavy scene. I think the strongest thing in the whole film, the idea came from a painting from Bacon, Francis Bacon. Ridley Scott told me that this painting from 46, it's just a crucifixion, and one of the member has just teeth and red flesh, and he liked to have the chest burster like that, and I did some design. They look like chicken, something like chicken without feather, but I was not happy with. And then build up the thing, and it looked like a small dinosaur, and that was awful. I said, cut the legs, and so finally we only had the head and the tail, and that was enough.
What I liked about the film is that it was a very logical film in many ways with a thriller format, and I thought that was an excellent blend. But it's perfectly reasonable. It seemed to me that something should, that some organism should incubate within the warmth of another being, you know, in that way.
I feel the strongest thing is always if it happened in your body or in someone's body. That's enormous. A worm in some, yeah, a worm in a living body. Oh. Yeah, that's just under the skin, and you see how it moves. Ooh, oh, oh. Yeah, I hate worms and snakes and things like that. It's awful.
Well, people always ask me if we knew what was happening. Well, of course, we'd read a script. We knew that this little beast was going to come out.
We all knew what was in the script, which was the chest burster, and then the line that John had, "Oh my God," and it was this long word.
Sigourney and I actually had a scene after where we had to have seen the little thing. So they took us down to the puppet shop because we said, we don't even know what it looks like. I mean, if we're supposed to be relating to this thing, we need to know what it looks like. So they took us down to the puppet shop to show us. And, of course, they were so cute. I mean, here's this, like, you know, sort of penis thing with these teeth. And here's this, the guy goes, oh, and it's fabulous. Watch this. It breathes. See how it breathes? And then its teeth will go in and out. He starts describing this whole thing. Of course, it wasn't totally finished, but he was, like, so excited. Oh, okay, thanks.
The atmosphere on the set had a certain frisson, you know, in the morning, because everybody knew that this was filmically a sort of major scene. I don't think anybody had any idea that it would become a kind of film classic. It was much publicized, the fact that the cast didn't know what was going to happen. Well, of course, they knew what was going to happen. They knew that that the alien was going to arrive that way. What they didn't know is that it was going to be capped with little explosives, and that when it actually burst through, there'd be quite a shattering explosion, and that they'd all get splattered with blood and stuff.
I was watching him go about all this, so I was watching the effects, how they were going to set it up, so I perhaps may have been the only one that was aware of how this was going to be done.
This was going to create such a mess. It was going to be a one-take operation anyway. So the table was the round kitchen table upon which John would fall, and they'd turn him over, stretch him out, and hold him down, and then he could start. Somewhere in there would be a airline on his chest, which would let off a blast of air in pink, which will go ch like that, and they all go, Jesus, leap back, and that gives them a cut. After that, clear the set, then we go in, and we basically screw down a artificial chest onto the table, which has its T-shirt pulled, you know, tightly on it. Then you're going to razor blade this gently, because when that thing hits, you want it to burst it, because you're going to have a one shot, and in there's going to be blood lines on high pressure pumps. They're going to blow blood everywhere.
I think our call was probably like 8 o'clock in the morning, something like that. 3 hours, 4 hours goes by. So Harry's in the aisles. He's playing music. I think we even went to lunch, and we came back, and we're still sitting up there.
I remember Veronica had no idea and wanted to be kept in the dark.
By this point, we were wondering, what the hell is going on? So by the time they take us down to the set, the entire thing is shrouded in plastic. They have huge big buckets of offal sitting around. The place smells of formaldehyde like you wouldn't believe it.
I think Nicky Alder sent one of the guys down to, Ridley being keen on reality, to the local abattoir, where they got some kind of offal and a lot of blood and nasty bits and pieces.
We went and got all sorts of horrible things and buried it inside the chest. The special effects guys had arranged a ram for it to break out.
When we came down to the set, there was going to be a rehearsal, which I think is great, and everyone was in black raincoats, and Ron Shusett and Dan O'Bannon, the original writers of the Chestburster idea, were over in the corner kind of going, you know, like kids before Christmas.
I saw their faces when they brought them in. What they saw was John Hurt spread out on this table with all of these hoses. Everybody is covered up in suits. The actors walk in and they see that waiting for them. And I saw them. Their faces all sort of dropped. They all sort of went like this, and their eyes got big and roamed around all over this stuff.
He says, all right, well, the thing comes through the chest and stuff like that. So we'll just start this scene. And then the special effects guy says to me, oh, you'll get a little blood on you. I said, well, okay, and so we all start. I said, John's acting, So everybody starts to lean in. And all of a sudden, Ridley shouts, cut! Because they realized that it wasn't going to break through this sort of starting scene that had been built.
We had problems with actually getting the device through the T-shirt, and the T-shirt had been sort of hit with a bit of acid and stuff to make it weaker, and then very carefully cut with blades and things. And so when that thing pushes up in the beginning and doesn't come through the thing, that was actually a mistake. But it looked so good with the blood sort of surging through the T-shirt.
So off we go again. So we're all leaning forward, we're all looking. And all of a sudden this thing, that was the first take. It was everybody's reaction. When that thing burst out of there, and they shot me with an entire blood pellet. It was like a jet of blood that hit I was so taken aback. My knees hit the back of the banquette, and I flipped upside down, and I had 2 cowboy boots sticking up. I turn over, I realize they're still shooting. I have to get up, and I continue acting.
I was looking across the chest on a longer lens towards Veronica Cartwright and Ian Holm. Blood sprayed everywhere. And I'm thinking to myself, God, what a fantastic actress, right? God, Ian's reacting well. God, that's great. I realized that Veronica was in shock.
She was so hysterical. She cried so much. I think it was real.
What you saw on camera was the real response. She had no idea what the hell happened. All of a sudden, this thing just came up.
Slow, Roger, and blood push out.
We didn't know what it was going to look like. And, I remember blood. I looked over, and Veronica had blood all over her face. It was shocking. It was, all at once, it was like for real.
There's this great master where all of us are like watching it run off, because I think we were totally taken aback by how skillful it would be. The little thing did its little, and gosh, it looked alive, and then we were all in shock. How'd they do that, as actors and as characters?
The whole thing was really a trick in the cut. I mean, as I went onto the table and was in pain and so on, you might say in the pangs of birth, there was a cut to the other side of the table by which time I had been replaced by a replica body, and that I was bent double under a hole in the table. So that happened in the cut from this side to that side. And then there was quite a long time as one prop man underneath the table kept pushing this alien on a stick, saying, "Is it coming through yet, Eric? Can you see it? Is it coming through?" He says, "No, not yet, Alf." You know, a lot of that was going on.
Under the table is Roger Deakins, who had actually finally got to do the chest burster. That wasn't Giger, it was Roger Deakins. And he let it fly, and it was very simply just underneath, next to John, shove it hard through up here, hits the thing, and bursts out. And then he has somebody on wires who's got to make it go, you know, the snarl, and then reaction of the actors. Then I can go to the next setup. And meanwhile, there'll be blood everywhere.
Turning, and ready. Ready, Rog? And action.
Blood.
Blood.
No.
Push it out. Pump it. Snarl. Snarl. Okay, and the head back. Snarl. Go!
Yeah, it's great.
Cut it.
Cut it. Save the blood.
The table was split, actually. There was about a 6-inch, maybe 8-inch gap. They had a man on a dolly, sort of skateboard thing underneath, and he had the puppet up like this. And then there was a guy with a rope, tow rope on the other side, and he would do his thing, and then they would just whip him out, and off he'd go.
They wanted the tail to move on it, and I hit upon the idea of just putting a little tiny thin plastic tube down the end of the tail, and just valving about 100 pounds to the square inch through the tail, and it made the tail do that as it went whistling off across the floor. And it was something that took us 5 minutes to do, and we thought that was going to be one of those things that was going to take us for ages to do.
Things could be done in post today. You know, we'll digitally do the little baby alien and stick him on later, etc. But we had to do it kind of then. So it's the same old kind of elastic band and chewing gum making movie type mentality that I think we were forced to use, but very, very effective. When it's cut well and shot well, it works incredibly effectively.
To me, when I look back, it's John's performance that's heartbreaking, heartbreaking. You know, he's our hero, and that this could happen to him is still, you know, spine-tingling.
We started off with the idea that the monster, there'd be no scales, no fangs, no claws. You know, it's going to be something completely different. Once we'd seen the head, the Giger head, that became the alien, we were in great shape on that. And Rambaldi actually built a separate head with 900 moving parts.
There are also tubes from an old Rolls-Royce, there are from vertebrates, from snakes, and it was a mixture from everything together, was built up together with plasticine that doesn't shrink much, and so it holds. You can put things together normally, it's not possible.
The creature design was one of those things that just kept on looming. In the end, that became, I think, one of my sort of major tasks was to find people, or to help find people. And I found Roger Deakins, who designed the face hugger, chest burster, and all that, the smaller things. He wanted very much to design the creature, but and there were several sort of attempts at that, but until Gordon Carroll, one of the three producers, but the main producer on the movie, brought in Carlo Rambaldi, done Close Encounters. They brought him in to actually put Giger's designs into practice. And I think we had one or two attempts at tails and heads from various people at Shepperton. You know, we had this elaborate mechanical tail that never ever really quite worked. So there were several attempts before Rambaldi was brought on at quite a lot of, over the budget, unfortunately, to do it. But my God, it did work from then on.
Because the Giger is the author, #1 of the creation of Alien, I don't suggest anything about modify something, the detail of the vein, of the muscle, of the face. No, no, no. In this case, the creator is Giger.
When the alien, the actual alien creature, which had been designed by Giger and manufactured by Carlo Rambaldi and his team, arrived, Ridley had a few problems with it. The mechanism, the jaw mechanism, actually had visible springs and things which were sticking out, and the head was wider than Ridley wanted it.
His paint, I think, was too long, the face. Must reduce, and too many detail. We conserve a lot of detail, but I think 20% of detail of the movement no need. You modify little. The mechanism of the mouth no was very complicated. It's 3 movements. One cable for open the mouth, second cable the tongue coming out from the mouth, and another cable for open the small mouth of the tongue. This is general mechanical system for the tongue, this drawing. And the tongue, when open the mouth, the tongue slide. Because it's impossible to clear the actor, we use this mechanical system just for control this movement. But after this mechanism was reduced very, when the actor is inside, because this is exactly the position of the head of the actor.
Well, it's going to be a guy in a suit, you know, and don't forget technology today, it'd be easy.
First we tried to invent something, so Ridley asked for some people from a circus, and they tried to walk in a specific way, or he wants to put 2 or 3 people together, bend them together and to put something over, and it was always a little ridiculous, the whole thing, and it wasn't scary. And so we decided, I think it's the scariest thing is to be very close to a human being.
In those days, I couldn't even get latex thin enough that wouldn't break, you know, quickly. And it would also take sculptural elements of sinew, and because you've got to lay the sinews into the rubber suit. So suddenly the rubber suit isn't like, it should have been as thin as a contraceptive and as strong as nylon, right? Because then I can crush this person into the suit and have all kinds of things built and stitched into it. I need someone extraordinarily thin, because whatever you did, there was a stuntman who was pretty thin, we put him in, it didn't look right. Funny enough, that week, one of the casting directors had been standing in a pub and had stared at this guy who looked like probably close to 7 feet, right? And very slender, very thin, kind of elegant, and his name was Balaji. So the guy had gone over to him in the pub and said, you know, they all lined, how would you like to be in movies? And the guy had a kind of North London accent, and he was a graphic designer. So he turned up with very bemused and curious, and he was then attached to the film for the next 10 months. And so he did all the stuff where he had to, like coming out the wall in the shuttle at the end, in the corridor coming around the corner when Sigoni's trying to get out with the cat, when he approaches Veronica Cartwright with his tail, and we get this sense of something really hideous because you hear her off camera.
They built the suit to him, which was just unbelievable. I mean, his hands were below his kneecaps when he would just stand normally. So they just literally put gloves on him with elongated hands, and they put that head on him, and they sent him to Tai Chi and to mime classes so that he could learn to slow down and manipulate, you know, and roll up. And when he first gets me, he's in a down position, and he comes up and rolls out, and it was just so creepy.
I always felt keep it really tight and only see the bits you want to see. Because this is always stronger than anything else. So if you think you've seen something, it's always going to be probably more horrific and horrifying.
I asked to Ridley, why are you shooting very little of Alien? And Ridley said, Carlo, the audience have terror when don't see nothing. When see the dark area, because expecting the monster possible here, and this is maximum the level of the suspense. Say, no, it's good. I shoot this little, Carlo, be quiet. Your movie, your monster, people saw, but very little.
Well, actually, we see quite a lot of the beast. And you certainly get a good old look at the chestburster. You get a terrific look at the egg. You get a great look at the other elements and the evolutions. And I think you get enough, plenty. You get a great look at the head, which is beautiful. Harry Dean Stanton, the thing's hanging there.
Now that was a gymnast that they got him put in that suit, and he was curled up in the change. The amazing thing was, when they shot up, you couldn't even tell that he was up there. The way he uncoiled and came down and then put his arms out, and I mean, it looked like, you know, that crucifix. Christ is ascending. I'm going to take your life now. I mean, it was like very bizarre and very sort of gothic, which goes a lot with what the whole Giger gothic thing is. Poor guy couldn't sit down, you know, so they made a special swing for him. Tom Skerritt said, I mean, this guy can't walk around like this. This is ridiculous. Do something for this poor person. They hadn't even thought of how he was going to sit down, because you have that tail and that rubber suit. I mean, that poor thing was in that suit all day long.
I came to work one day right at the lunch break, so the big doors were open, and out of the sound stage came the crew and the alien monster, still in his suit, but with the head off, thin as a nail. And he's walking with the wardrobe lady, who's 5 feet. And they're talking politics, with a very intense conversation as they're walking off to lunch. And he's got these tennis shoes on that are bright blue, Adidas. And the tail is being carried by another wardrobe guy who was a rather flamboyant guy who had this white ascot blowing in the wind. It was one of those, I wish I could have photographed that one.
We used to have a dresser. His name was Mother. We called her Mother. And he was in charge of doing the alien. Of course, there was always supposed to be a lot of slime and stuff on him.
KY jelly was very much in fashion at the time, and I think that was put on everything that moved in front of the camera, on the alien, it was dripping from everywhere.
I have never seen bigger tubes of KY jelly. They were like gigantic sizes. And then you'd have Mother going, I'll do it. And then he would come running out with his huge big tubes of KY and start caressing this poor alien's ass, rubbing it and making it glisten. And, oh, God, it was hysterical. We did have some good times.
There was a lot of money, there was a lot of construction. This was not a little movie.
And for a period of time, I didn't have a weekend off for 11 weeks.
Is this for killing it? That's the way we'll do it. I'm for that. Nothing else.
It got tense inside those corridors.
He loves working with smoke. Tons of smoke. This beeswax.
Sometimes I know that they used to complain about me not sitting there having a heart-to-heart. I didn't want to sit there and have a heart-to-heart. I wanted them to feel insecure. I wanted them to be afraid. And that's why I never show them the alien.
The whole thing pivoted on believing a number of rather fantastic things. And it was very clear that if the monster looked silly or the chest-bursting scene looked ridiculous, or, you know, the whole thing was a lost cause.
My personal predominant writing emotion throughout that whole production was deep worry. For once in my career, create a really good movie. The elements were there. And at the same time, there were elements there that could bring it all down and turn it into, you know, kitty litter.
We shot at Shepperton Studios. Then it was a kind of slightly run down just outside of London and been a famous studio. The Who were in a soundstage trying out a laser show next door to us. There was a special effects unit at Bray Studios, which was way at the other end of London. I actually left right when they started shooting. I thought, you know, Gordon was going to stay there. Came back when there were some problems and spent most of the next year there, you know, until we were finished.
I went on the set several times, yes. Quite remarkable, actually. I didn't expect it to be quite as fascinating as I found it to be. I remember the first day I went on the set, they took me through the whole workshop and showed me what they were doing, and I was pleasantly surprised.
I seem to remember the length of the production was, I think it must have been about 14 weeks. I know we went over a couple. It was a tough schedule, very, very tough. It was tough because he really was, as always, pushes the fabric.
It was tense because the budget was very low, and there were, within the first 4 days of shooting, there were 9 producers and studio executives on the set just counting the minutes on Ridley and complaining and why wasn't he shooting, and he was shooting so fast. They gave him no pre-light time, so he was trying to find the look in the first 2 days. And one of the producers, I remember, came to me on the 4th day and said, "Why is he taking so long?" And I said to him, "I don't understand what you're saying. He's doing 40 setups, 50 a day sometimes. The stuff looks amazing. I don't know what you're all doing." And it did get to Ridley. I remember one instant, I was right next to him. He went off like a rocket. It was like power coming out, and he punched his fist right through the ceiling of the bridge in just sheer frustration because he did not understand why everyone was on his back.
Well, of course, our first day of shooting, and all of the things start popping, and there was smoke, so much smoke, it was unbelievable. The canisters were going, and the smoke was being pumped in because we're supposed to be on fire as we're crash landing into this strange planet. I'm surprised none of us are dead. I mean, they didn't have codes like here. They have to have a water base, which took a long time for them to get, but over there, it was like smelt pots. You were so grimy when you left at the end of the day. I mean, between the being sprayed with glycerin and the smoke and the beeswax. John Marlowe was the one who designed the costumes, and these costumes were, well, they were huge. They were padded. We had big plates. They were like football padding, only they were sort of very, very heavy plastic, and then we had these big bubbles on the top of our heads, and they had CO2 canisters in the back to set off that smoke as we went along.
Standing in a spaceship with a clip on, fastening it on, within 15 seconds I'm getting really hot. And I don't get claustrophobic, but I'm getting really hot, and you could easily get phobic, right? I said, Jesus, this doesn't work. You've got to keep them cool inside here. We have to have some kind of help with, you know, oxygen, correct mix, right? After all, we are in the 20th century. Isn't that possible? You've got aqualungs and you've got breathing apparatus. And explained to me why it was difficult.
We had hockey gloves that we had to wear, and moon boots, and this desert. It was the largest set in Europe. It was huge. It was a desert. They shipped in all of the sand. It was absolutely unbelievable. And here we are. We're supposed to trudge across it. Well, it was a heat wave. It was 115 degrees. Our suits had been lined with nylon, which makes you sweat anyway. We just wore sort of like little leotards underneath the whole thing, and then we'd get into this suit, and then off we'd go. Well, they had forgotten to put in any sort of escape for our breath. Well, if you're in there for any length of period of time, you start breathing carbon dioxide.
I do remember I almost passed out because a lot of that stuff was untried. They put it on you, and you just tried to see if it would work for you, and I really could not breathe.
We were passing out like flies. I mean, it was unbelievable. Poor John, by the time he'd get to the other end, they had to have a nurse there with an oxygen tank because he would sweat so profusely in there, he couldn't even see. It would just be one big, massive bowl of sweat.
I can remember John being very, very unhappy about, I think he found it pretty claustrophobic, shut up in the helmet.
So they'd have the nurse give him some oxygen and stuff like that, and all right, off we go again. They couldn't see a problem until it came to the distant shot where, to make the set even look bigger, they had kids. And 2 of the kids were Ridley's kids. And they both passed out in those little suits. So then, obviously, there must have been something that was going on, so they gave us air. That was nice of them.
I mean, Ridley pushes everybody. He tends to concentrate on all aspects of the frame. In other words, he's painting his picture, and so sometimes actors who are not used to this are used to the director sort of focusing on them and them only, whereas Ridley is concerned about, you know, the look, about the dust, about the lighting, about the way things are dressed and things like that. I think they found sometimes that they were probably being a little bit neglected, and I remember Tom had some kind of angry words about having to hang around a long time on set.
The studio, of course, resisted a lot of what he was doing, resisted the time he was taking. I resisted some of the time he was taking. We had a full cast waiting for 3 days in one case.
Now, Tom, in your time.
I mean,
okay?
wait till I'm moving here.
Yes, I will. Okay, ready? And action. Ready, Tom? Turn back to me now. Ready?
And we all were getting pretty disgruntled. But it was all worth it. We all knew we were making a classic.
The first week, I had to I think, grab Jonesy, and I was wearing glycerin because it was supposed to be hot and we were supposed to be sweaty. And we did this shot, and my face started to get very red, and I felt this incredible burning. And I looked at the cat, and luckily they called lunch. I went upstairs. I was crying because I realized I was allergic to Jones. And I thought, gosh, it was probably so hard for Ridley to find 4 matching cats. They're going to get rid of me because I'm allergic to the cat. I was sure that it had been harder to find the cats than me, and maybe it was as hard, I don't know. But luckily, after I washed my face, it was the glycerin in cat hair that I was allergic to. But I remember thinking, I'm so out of here, you know.
Everything was so claustrophobic on that set. I mean, that is one of those sets where you walked in, and there's the engine room. Well, that's fine, but connected to that is the corridor. Connected to that was the cafeteria. Connected to that was the hospital. It was all connected, the ship. So once you were on, you were on. You had to go through everything in order to get off.
So you could actually walk around the set and come out in different places and never leave it. And that's, in a way, how Ridley liked it and shot it.
And you couldn't see out, so you didn't know where you were. And it was almost like shooting on location, and that really did contribute to the claustrophobia and the realism. I know it really affected the actors because they, no matter where they looked, they saw Nostromo, you know, long halls and everything. They never, with practical lighting, you know, all inside.
Because I was mostly off-Broadway actor, to be in this set that were these beautiful, majestic sets where you could roam freely and see the whole world of the film.
I think when you're dealing with confined space, that's one of the very much used aspects of the thriller as well. It's the very center of the pieces like Huis Clos and so on, you know? It's, there is no escape. That is one of the bases of the real tension of the film.
It was a low-key subject. There were very, very tight areas. Quite difficult to light in places, so unless you were going to swamp something with front light, then it was a bit complex, especially as so much of the movie was shot handheld with Ridley, although he did some form of blocking. It didn't mean to say it was particularly where he was going to end up. He also storyboards everything. He does small sketches, brilliant. You know, you get the light, the shade, the whole caboodle there. So it was his choice of lenses. It was his choice of where he was going with that particular camera. I suppose my effort was more in towards, I covered most of it with a second camera, tended to do the tighter shots when his camera wasn't in my shot.
Ridley was really subjective. He was operating the camera, so I don't think he could really pull back. We sensed right at the top that he wasn't able to pull back and be objective and come to us and talk to us about specifics. So being with an extraordinary group of actors allowed him to do what he was doing in terms of just composing this magnificent looking film, looking through the camera.
He did something no director's ever done before or since. He had about 5 or 6 pages of each character. And this is the actor's work usually, but he had the whole background, how many missions I'd flown, my mother and father, my family, had my whole history written out on paper.
This is one of the things about Dallas's character, and for the other characters too, there was no history. It was hard to really, it was about the alien, let's face it. It wasn't about these character building any one of these individuals. That was something we had to realize as we went along.
I think we ought to discuss the bonus situation.
Right.
Brett and I, we think we deserve full shares, right, baby?
Well, we were doing the breakfast scene, and it was very low energy, I remember, and I could tell that Ridley wasn't pleased, but he was again behind the camera, and as we walked away from the master with the group of all of us, Ridley suddenly turned to me and he grabbed my hand. He said, "Look, I want to give you your motivation to pick up your fucking teacup." And I went, and I burst into tears, and I ran off. And he caught up with me, and he said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm really sorry." He said, "It's what I wanted to say to John, but I couldn't say it to him, so I said it to you." It was his second film and my first film, and he always said, you know, it was trial by fire for us.
Over the years, I've learned to communicate differently with actors on different subjects. Sometimes it's best to say nothing and let them evolve, right? And then instruct.
It was interesting. We'd find ourselves going off and having lunch together and going down to the pub and talking, and it actually became like these, you know, 7 people on the ship. It was kind of interesting, and you sort of developed your own little character from that.
Well, you know, I was from the theater, and I didn't realize that some actors really love to improvise, and Yaphet was certainly one of those. And Ridley, at that point, he was operating, and I'm not sure how comfortable he felt with our little group. And I remember that one of the scenes where there was a lot of improvisation was a scene which he used to film the rehearsals. So he never had rehearsals, and everyone just sort of went for it, which was actually a great learning experience. But that's, and it helps the film, because I think we were on edge, and we were sort of, you know, into a survival mode. So I think it works very well. But at the time, it was hard for me because I came from such a different discipline where you are very faithful to the words of the writer.
Well, Yaphet's a big guy and quite formidable, and I think he tried to corner Ridley. There was a sort of a running joke where Ridley used to come up to us and say, which door is Yaphet standing by this morning, you know, so that he could go onto the set via another door where Yaphet wasn't there waiting to corner him.
Yaphet was always evolving, and in God bless him, driving me crazy, come to me with millions of ideas on a daily basis. Saying, even to the extent of the day he would die, saying, you know, I'm not going to die today. I'm going to kill this son of a bitch, you know. And
I think there was genuine tension between, funnily enough, the tension in the film between the below decks guys, between Yaphet and Harry Dean Stanton, was sort of reflected to a degree actually in reality, because I think Sigourney found it quite lonely, being the sort of, you know, the heroine amongst all these kind of tough guys, and it's certain parts of that atmosphere I think carried on a bit.
Would you get off my back, please?
I'll get off your back as soon as module 6.
Sigourney had certain nervousnesses because Ridley wasn't inviting her at all to rushes, and it was an early movie for her, so she wasn't quite sure how she was coming over.
Sigourney was the new kid on the block, and they all felt that she wasn't really doing that good a job in the scenes with her. And they were grumbling among each other and felt that it might hurt the success of the film. And she and Yaphet especially would argue a lot in between scenes, but that manifested itself in the movie that was very convincing.
Anybody say nothing?
I'm thinking.
Well, think fast.
Unless somebody can come up with a better idea, we're going to proceed with Dallas's plan.
She started out being very emotional and all of this stuff because of Dallas dying, and he just kept pushing her and pushing her. And then comes Yaphet, and he goes, all right, what are we supposed to do now? And then there's the scene, and then she says, I'm the captain of this ship. And he looked at her and he goes, you've got to be kidding.
Listen, I'm not throwing you goddamn straws. I'm killing that thing right goddamn now, and I'm not waiting.
That's what I'm talking about, Parker, if you will listen.
Let's hear it. I'm listening. I want to hear the plan.
Well, the third time he comes on, he goes, you're the captain of the ship? I'm 250 pounds, black as can be. I have a fucking following, bitch. So if you're the captain of this ship, you better fucking tell me I am. Well, off he goes again. This time he comes on, and I'm sure that Ridley was egging her up because she had to be really, really strong. And so now this time he comes into the thing, and she goes, I'm the captain of this ship. And he says, okay.
Listen to me. If we break quarantine, we could all die.
Would you open the goddamn hatch? We have to get him inside. There was the scene in the hallway when she won't let us onto the ship after this whole trudging along with the bloodsucker on John's face, and we come in, and then she starts getting upset and saying, you know, we shouldn't be there, and then I slug her. Well, every time I went to hit her, she would duck the hit.
Ray, what the fuck is going on?
Hey!
And so Ridley came over and he said to me, get her this time. So I thought, well, what am I supposed to do? I went like this, she ducked, and I came back and hit her that way. She went right into it. I didn't mean to hurt her. She literally went right into it.
What the fuck is going on?
Hey!
And she burst out crying, and that's what pissed her off, because she said that Ripley wouldn't cry. So she wasn't too happy about that, and she didn't feel that it was necessary to do that. But I guess Ridley felt that it was necessary to do that.